Hello YouTube, Bane666 here. So in today's video I'm going to be exploring the toxic feminist narrative concerning masculinity. Now feminists like to throw around the term toxic masculinity, but it's actually their interpretation of masculinity which is toxic. And that interpretation of masculinity is built on hate towards masculinity, as we will see. And unfortunately for feminism, which claims to be all about equality, this hate towards masculinity is one of the supporting pillars of the entire ideology. It is a cornerstone of the ideology. If you pull away that hate of masculinity, the entire feminist narrative tends to fall apart pretty fucking quickly. Despite what a lot of bedroom feminists say, you know, feminism is just about equality. Haven't you read the dictionary definition? What's wrong with you? You clearly don't understand what feminism is about, even though they themselves have no understanding of what the ideology is actually about. Now, few things really show the lack of understanding of masculinity and the hatred towards masculinity more than a comment I saw in response to the Village Voice article about the Red Pill movie a few years ago. Now, unfortunately, the comment section to that article seems to have disappeared, so I can't show you a screenshot of that actual comment. I thought I'd taken a screenshot, but I can't find it amongst my literally thousands of screenshots of articles and clips of videos and the rest of it. But I do clearly remember what that comment said. It basically made 2 points. The first point was that MRAs don't know what they're talking about. Now, I would assume that the person making this comment had not seen the Red Pill movie, because at the time this article was published, the Red Pill movie had exactly one screening. And the likelihood of this person actually going to that screening is pretty low. So I'm assuming their entire opinion of the movie was based on the biased Village Voice article. But anyway, the first point that this woman made was that MRAs don't understand what they're talking about. And her reasoning for this, it's something I'm sure you've heard before. Her reasoning was, if MRAs just express their emotions more, then all their issues would magically just disappear. And, you know, this is such a simple concept that she really couldn't understand why MRAs couldn't realize it. You know, it really shows that they're not really interested in dealing with these issues at all. Because, you know, we all know that if newborn baby boys were just to express their emotions more like women, you know, they wouldn't be circumcised anymore, right? That would stop instantly, right? I mean, that's logical. And I'm sure a man in a court case, if he just expressed his emotions like a woman and made excuses which normally get a female criminal a lighter sentence or off scot-free, I'm sure the court would view him in exactly the same way, as opposed to, you know, penalising him for making such excuses and showing such emotion. Yes, clearly the only issue is that men don't express their emotions properly, right? Everything would disappear. All the MRA issues would magically disappear if only men did that. False rape allegations would disappear. The family court would be, you know, sympathetic to fathers and give them equal custody, and the draft would also disappear. And everything would be solved with that one simple thing. And then she went on to make her second point, which was MRAs are actually crying man babies. Now, I don't remember the exact words she used, but it was something along those lines of MRAs just crying and trying to play the victim, etc., etc. You know the type of thing we hear from feminists all the time about drinking male tears, that type of thing. And at no point did it occur to her that these two arguments that she's making are directly contradictory. The cognitive dissonance to make two such arguments back to back is truly fucking astounding. To say, if only men expressed their emotions more and talked about their issues, while at the same time condemning a group of men for expressing their emotions and talking about their issues. Absolutely fucking astounding. Now, my point in bringing this up is that the game is rigged. The feminists have basically rigged the chessboard, so it doesn't matter what move you make, you are going to lose in their eyes. If you express your emotions, then you're a whining, crying man baby. If you don't express your emotions, then that's toxic masculinity, and clearly all the issues MRAs bring up are your fault. And you're just a product of the patriarchy, and you're too stupid to realise that you're supporting it. It doesn't matter what you do or say. In their eyes, you're wrong. And that's because they're starting from the ideological viewpoint that masculinity is wrong, that males are always guilty, that males are always responsible, no matter what, and women are always their victims. Speaking of which, here's a video from Francis Maxwell from the Young Turks discussing that very point. Now, he is talking about the Gillette ad, and I do realise that came out over a month ago, and I've already done 2 videos debunking that, but the Gillette ad is not the thing I'm focusing on here. It is the bullshit arguments made by one Mr. Francis Maxwell.
That deadly rampage at a Florida bank tonight, we have now learned that all 5 victims were women.
Saturday morning, Elizabeth and Keith Terrio were shot in their home. When police responded, they were able to identify their 21-year-old son, Dakota Terrio, as the man who shot them. They were looking for the same man, Dakota Terrio, as Dakota is believed to have had a relationship.
A man who was holding 2 women captive at a UPS facility in Logan Township.
Saturday
Deadly
morning,
rampage at a
Elizabeth
Florida
and
bank
Keith
tonight, we have
Terrio were
now
shot
learned
in
that
their
all
home.
5
When
victims
police
were women.
responded,
Maybe these shootings should spark more outrage than a razor commercial. We're 1 month into 2019. Here are just a few of the mass shootings you probably didn't hear about. In Florida, a 21-year-old man armed with a 9mm handgun and ammunition he had legally purchased just 5 days prior walked into a bank, forced 5 women inside to lie down on the lobby floor before shooting them each in the back of the head. The Louisiana man shot and killed his girlfriend, his parents, and 2 others with a handgun he stole from his father. A New
We seem to be developing a little bit of a pattern here with these cherry-picked examples. It's almost like he's only picking cases where men killed women. Now, it is true in that second case that the guy did kill his father as well, but I'm pretty sure it wouldn't be used as an example by Francis Maxwell here if he didn't kill his girlfriend and mother as well. If he had just killed his father, I'm sure that would have been completely left out. But let's continue to see if this is a recurring pattern of men killing women.
A man opened fire at a UPS facility and took 2 women, one of whom was an ex-girlfriend, hostage.
Oh, look at that. Another example of male violence against women. I wonder if this is a pattern we're seeing here.
Pennsylvania man went on a shooting spree near Penn State University, killing 4 people and wounding, yes, an ex-girlfriend.
Now that's interesting. He killed 4 people and wounded an ex-girlfriend. I wonder what gender those 4 people were. That seems to be less important than wounding the girlfriend for some reason. How strange.
Police say the gunman entered P.J. Harrigan's Bar and Grill in State College at about 10:30 last night, about 2 miles from Penn State's main campus. According to investigators, 21-year-old Jordan Whitmer of Bellefonte shot and killed 2 men inside the bar. A woman was also shot and is in critical condition. Authorities say the suspect then killed an 83-year-old man inside of his home nearby before turning the gun on himself.
Well, isn't that a very interesting case of cherry-picking done by Francis Maxwell there? It turns out the 4 people who were shot by this gunman were 62-year-old Dean Bitchute, Steve Bitchute, who was Dean Bitchute's son, and 83-year-old George McCormick. Now, the fourth person who was killed by the gunman was himself when he committed suicide. All four of the people, as Francis put it, were male. He seemed to have left that bit out for some reason and instead focused on the ex-girlfriend who was injured by the gunman. Now, the interesting thing is, I got all this information from the article which Francis himself put up on the screen, including that clip you just saw. Strangely, though, the article doesn't mention that the woman shot was the gunman's girlfriend, so I have no idea whether she was or not. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think that's beside the point here, because the interesting thing here is that Francis Maxwell would ignore 4 dead men, including the gunman, and instead focus on one injured woman. Let's continue.
Oregon, a 36-year-old man shot and killed a woman on their first date. They had just returned to her apartment after hiking. The 15-year-old girl was killed by her 17-year-old boyfriend in Spring, Texas.
Now, that's very interesting because the article that Francis just showed said accidentally. So let's go to the website where Francis got his information from and have a look at the video they have there.
Marlboro says she got the call around 5 this morning.
She's a very sweet, humble, giving, kind-hearted girl. She's very mindful, respectful, everything that you would want in a daughter.
When she arrived to the Kimberly Glen Lane home, she learned 15-year-old Michaela Simon had been shot and killed. She says everyone is stunned. Tonight, Simon's boyfriend, 17-year-old Javon Martin, faced charges of criminally negligent homicide in Harris County probable cause courts.
Officers conducted an interview with Javon Martin where he advised he had picked up the gun and was pointing it in the direction of Michaela when he pulled the trigger. He advised the gun went off.
Deputies with the Harris County Sheriff's Office say Martin was playing with the rifle at the home and pointed the weapon at Simon. In court, prosecutors said Martin also has a pending case of unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. This deadly mix of teens and guns comes less than a week after a 17-year-old girl was charged in the fatal shooting of her boyfriend in West Harris County. Simon was a 9th grader at Lamar High who just celebrated her birthday with friends. Her loved ones are devastated. It was her last.
Very hard, and everybody want answers and justice.
Now, hold on a second. What was that towards the end of that clip? It said this case happened just a week after a 17-year-old girl shot her 15-year-old boyfriend. So basically the exact same case here, only the genders are reversed. Let's have a quick look at that particular case.
Breaking news now, a 17-year-old girl is under arrest in a shooting that killed her boyfriend. Deputies say she first claimed she shot him accidentally. 17-year-old Annabelle Lopez was taken into custody Monday. This is her new mugshot released overnight. Investigators were called to a home on Jennicay Lane in West Harris County. That's where 17-year-old Oscar Alvarado was found with a gunshot wound to the shoulder, but he later died at the hospital. Authorities say Lopez admitted she was playing with the gun and accidentally shot him.
Now, this is fascinating. In 1 month, we have 2 cases where teens were playing with guns, and it ended up with a 17-year-old teen shooting a 15-year-old teen. Now, the only difference in these cases is the genders of the people who pulled the trigger and the genders of the people who died. And in both cases, they claim it was accidental. But I'll get back to that in a second. So despite these 2 cases happening in the same month, and only being a week apart, and having exactly the same circumstances, Francis cherry picks one and totally ignores the other. And not only does he cherry pick that particular one, he ignores the fact that the claim is that the shooting was accidental, and instead spins the toxic masculinity narrative. Now, surely the Young Turks, being anti-gun or gun control as they are, they could have highlighted both cases and talked about teens playing with guns and how this often results in accidental shootings. They could have talked about guns not being a toy but being a weapon, and if someone's going to use a gun or own a gun, they should be responsible. But no, instead we get a cherry-picked case where one is ignored and the other is misrepresented as toxic masculinity. Now, for the record, I don't know if either of these cases are accidental or whether the claim of an accidental shooting is just an excuse. Although there is some additional information in the case that Francis presented, which he seems to also have ignored. Now, let's have a quick look at that.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. We are learning new details about the deadly shooting of a 15-year-old girl.
Investigators say her boyfriend killed her. Instagram videos show the teens playing with guns, including an assault rifle, before the shooting. Our Kathy Hernandez is following the story live from Lamar High School, where the victim was a freshman. Kathy?
Good morning. Michaela Simon just celebrated her birthday, and she was a freshman here at Lamar High School. Today, grief counselors will be available for the students. Meanwhile, her boyfriend is accused in her death, and right now, he remains behind bars. Family members of Michaela Simon released this shocking video showing teens playing with guns inside a spring home early Sunday. This one shows what appears to be Michaela's boyfriend, Javon Martin, pointing a gun at her, even as she says to stop.
Officers conducted an interview with Javon Martin where he advised he had picked up the gun and was pointing it in the direction of Michaela when he pulled the trigger. He advised the gun went off and Michaela fell to the ground.
Michaela died from a gunshot wound to the chest. Martin claims it was an accident. Loved ones say the two were dating, and they had been arguing recently about cheating allegations. And Martin was already out on bond for an unrelated case. The judge set his bond in this case for $10,000, and he's set to appear before a judge at 9 o'clock this morning. Reporting live in River Oaks, Kathy Hernandez, KPRC.
Okay, so there's footage showing a group of teens playing with guns. So we know that it wasn't just the suspect and his girlfriend. There was a group of people there, and we can clearly see one of the people playing with guns was a female. Now, I don't know if this particular female is the victim or a different female in the same group. But this would support the accident narrative. Now, obviously, it needs to go to trial and the police need to investigate and the court needs to determine, because we don't have all the information here. But there is reason to suspect that it may have actually been an accident. Now, the other thing you saw in that video clip was that apparently the couple were arguing over cheating. Now, the video doesn't actually say who was cheating. If it was the victim who was cheating, then you might come to the conclusion that maybe the reason he shot her was because she was cheating on him. It might be a motivation. And I'm sure a lot of people have come to that conclusion, but they didn't actually say who was cheating. It could have been the accused who was cheating, and that might have absolutely nothing to do with what was actually an accident. But it's interesting that Francis is so quick to judge and convict a black man. After so many Young Turks videos saying that society judges black men just because they're black, etc., etc., we get Francis here jumping to the conclusion that this guy's guilty when he hasn't even gone to trial. And there's a reasonable chance that it was an accident. But I guess Francis isn't really looking at the fact that he's black. Francis is just looking at the fact that he's male. And there's a good chance that Francis didn't even bother reading the article. He just looked at the headline. Right, Francis? But this is part of the toxic narrative where you cherry pick certain cases, you interpret those certain cases a certain way, and that's all you present. You start with the conclusion and then you work backwards. But let's continue.
As you can see, the majority of these known suspects were young men and already had some history of violence or threatened violence towards women.
Yes, all those cases do have something in common. They were all cherry-picked by Francis Maxwell to suit a particular narrative, right? So, I mean, what a surprise that they all have something in common. Who would have guessed it? Now, if we never talked about male and female violence, then I would support Francis Maxwell cherry-picking these cases to point out that such things do happen. But unfortunately for Frances, this is the only narrative that we tend to talk about. We are constantly bombarded with messages about male violence towards women. In fact, there are ad campaigns which spend millions of dollars of taxpayers' money on this message alone.
Violence against women starts with disrespect. The excuses we make allow it to grow. Violence against women. Let's stop it at the start. Authorised by the Australian Government, Canberra.
So it's strange that Frances would somehow insinuate that we never talk about this particular thing, which just so happens to be pretty much the only thing that we talk about, while at the same time he excludes other forms of violence, like male-on-male violence, to the point where he refers to male victims as people, so you don't notice that the gunman actually killed 4 males while only injuring 1 woman. But let's continue.
All of these horrific instances should have made more headlines and sparked more of a conversation than a damn razor commercial. But instead, they just became additions to the growing number of misogyny leading to gun violence in America.
So here we have it, right? When men kill women, it's misogyny, it's patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. It's because men are bad and women are their victims and women are oppressed by men, etc., etc. We've heard this toxic narrative over and over again, and I have to say it's absolute bullshit. And I can prove it's bullshit with 2 little statistics. Now, the first statistic is that the majority of victims when it comes to violence and murder are males. Not by a small margin, but by a massive margin. Now, the feminist argument against this is, but that's males doing it to other males. Even if this is true, it's still a good reason why we shouldn't focus exclusively on males being violent towards females and come to the conclusion that that is somehow misogyny. If males are vastly more violent towards other males, then how can you conclude that male violence towards females is due to sexism? If you're saying that males are violent towards women because of some deep-seated hatred for women, then surely males must hate each other even more, right? Yeah, but somehow feminists don't come to that conclusion. They leave that bit out. They just exclude male victims of male violence as unimportant or less important than female victims, as we saw Frances do in that example I pointed out. The other statistic I want to point out is that women are 10 times more likely to commit suicide than to be killed by a male partner, which is interesting. So let's break that down for a second. Males are vastly more likely to be violent towards other males, and females are vastly more likely to hurt themselves than to be hurt by a male. Yet the only form of violence we should focus on is male violence towards women. That is a very, very interesting choice, isn't it? It's almost like they're going from a narrative that says that males are bad and females are their victims. And anything that doesn't fit that narrative, should just be ignored or excluded, right?
So here's what I don't get. When people go absolutely bananas because a company wanted to perhaps contribute to a larger conversation, whether they went about it in the best way possible or not, the instinct is to attack the company instead of perhaps trying to understand why they are trying to be more socially responsible in the first place.
I think the reasoning behind it was pretty clear, Frances, and as I'll be pointing out in this video, it actually adds to a very harmful attitude towards males and masculinity.
The culture of false allegations, sometimes to get legal aid in the family court arena, is also a killer. I'll read another quote of another real person. I had my children taken away from me. Then 42 allegations were made against me. Suicide seemed the best option. Twice I tried to hang myself, and once I stood on a railway track and the Samaritans talked me off the track. Men are criticised for not engaging and not talking about how they feel. But when you are in the family court system, you cannot talk about any suicidal feelings, any emotional turmoil, because that will be used against you to prevent you from seeing your children. And I look forward to the day when criminal justice is dealt with by Wales in a completely different way, especially in the family arena. In this city, in our capital city of Wales, there is no non-judgmental support for men. Men are always treated as perpetrators and they are screened. I want to quote a friend of Alex Skewed, a very brave man who took part in the BBC documentary. He was abused by Jordan Worth, the first female to be jailed for coercive control. And he said, "It doesn't matter what gender they are. A victim is still a victim. An abuser is still an abuser. A victim still hurts whether they are male or female. An abuser is just as nasty whether they are male or female."
So, by constantly putting forward a toxic narrative that men are toxic and masculinity is toxic and the greatest danger to women is males and masculinity, what you do is you make it harder for male victims to come forward, to be believed. You make it easier for female abusers to make false allegations, especially in the family court. You make it easier for female criminals to get away with crimes by crying victim, even when they're not. And you add to all the negative things which are responsible for the extremely high male suicide rate. Telling men that they are toxic is not the solution. It is something which is making the problem far, far worse. And it all comes from a toxic feminist narrative. And we're about to see more examples of that with the Young Turks in a minute. But before then, I just have to say, I got that clip from a YouTube channel called The Glass Blind Spot. And once you finish watching this video, I want you to go to that channel and subscribe, because I have to say, without a doubt, it's one of the best MRA channels out there. Now, not as good as mine, but then again, I'm incredibly modest. I'm easily one of the most modest people on the internet, so it's not quite as good as mine, but it's close. And I highly recommend everyone go and subscribe to it now. But yeah, back to the more serious stuff with Francis Maxwell.
The answer is not to vilify all men. That's just what conservatives too afraid of looking at themselves in the mirror will say. As do those who want to avoid any conversation surrounding police brutality by saying it's not all cops. We know it's not, but the reality is the issue of misogyny driving gun violence towards women is a uniquely American crisis. Women...
Now, I am so glad that Francis brought up domestic violence and gun violence and made the connection, because yeah, that's really something that we should talk about, right, Young Turks? Now, let me give you a fictitious scenario, and then I want you to imagine what the Young Turks would say about this fictitious scenario, right? So imagine there's a man and a woman, and they get into an argument within a house, and the man goes out to his car and he takes a handgun out of the glove compartment and he goes back into the house and he points the gun at the woman's head. She puts her hands up, but he fires anyway, and the bullet narrowly misses her head and goes through the kitchen wall, through the living room wall where her two young children are, and embeds itself in the living room's roof. She then flees the house with her two children and rings the police, and the violent man with the gun is arrested by the police and put in prison awaiting trial. Now, he happens to get bail, and some 2 months after the initial incident, the initial shooting, he goes back to her place and he physically assaults her. She has a bruised and swollen eye, according to the police report afterwards. She rings the police, he flees. The cops later catch up to him and he claims he's got an alibi, but then later on changes his story and says that she is the one who physically assaulted him, even though he has absolutely no marks or bruises on his body whatsoever. His bail is revoked and he's sent back to prison. And he entered no contest to the charge of domestic battery, which I think would be fairly important in this story. He's not denying that he physically assaulted his female partner. So how do you think the Young Turks would react to that story? What do you think their reaction would be? How do you think they would report it? I think you would have a pretty good idea of what they would say, right? It doesn't take a great deal of imagination to figure out what their arguments would be. Okay, now, what about if we reverse the genders?
At the time of the George Zimmerman case, there was another case involving a woman by the name of Marissa Alexander. She was also using stand your ground as a defense, and I would like to clarify, eventually the George Zimmerman defense decided not to use that as a defense. But Marissa Alexander had used a gun and fired it at the ceiling when she felt that her husband was a threat.
Now, this is something that the Young Turks say over and over and over again in the clips I'm about to show you. They say that she fired a warning shot into the ceiling to scare him off, right? Now, this is 100% fucking bullshit. According to the court documents, she pointed the gun in the direction of all three victims, that includes his two children. He then put his hands in the air and she fired the gun, nearly missing his head and sending the bullet through the kitchen wall and into the ceiling in the living room. Okay? Now, if you fire at someone's head and the bullet goes through the fucking wall and into the next room, that is not a warning shot. But the Young Turks never bothered to really investigate this case to find out what happened, because it fit their narrative, the narrative of the bad man and the helpless woman, who not only happens to be female, but she's also black, right? So that also fits their narrative of the bad court system treating her unfairly because of her race. So according to them, she's a victim twice because of these things, despite the fact that she tried to kill her husband.
Now, she was estranged from her husband. She had shown up to the home that they once shared to gather some of her belongings because she believed that he was not there at the time. However, when she showed up, they got into an altercation. He was yelling at her. He threatened her. And as a result, she ran to the garage to get into her car and leave. Then she realized that she couldn't get into her car because she didn't have keys. And since she felt threatened by him, she grabbed a gun and she shot at the ceiling.
Now, it's utterly astounding how many facts that the Young Turks get wrong here, apart from the fact that she shot at his head and not at the fucking ceiling. They weren't separated. In fact, they just had a child together. They'd only just been married for a couple of months. She didn't just drop by to pick up some things. She arrived there when he wasn't home, and she actually spent the night there. And Gray came back the next day with his two children, and the family ate breakfast together without incident. Once again, this is all from the court documents. Now, where the trouble began was when Alexander went to take a shower, and she gave her phone to Gray so he could look at their newborn baby photos. But Gray noticed that there were certain text messages between Alexander and her ex-husband, and he thought that maybe the child isn't actually his, but is the child of the ex-husband, and this led them to an argument. She could have left through the front or back door of the house. But she decided to go out to her car in the garage and get the gun from her glove compartment and then come back and shoot at Gray. Now, she claimed later on that she couldn't leave because the garage door was broken, which was also a lie. So if she was in fear of her life, she had lots of options to leave. There were lots of things she could have done. She could have used the front door, the back door, or left in her car through the garage. But she chose to do none of those things. She chose to get the handgun from her glove box, go back in the house, and then shoot at his head. Not into the ceiling, but at his head. And somehow, she's the victim in this. Absolutely fucking amazing.
She did not injure him. She did not kill him. He is totally fine. However, she did stand trial for that, and the stand your ground defense in her case did not work.
Yeah, because she could have left at any point. In fact, she did leave. She went out to her car, got her handgun, and then came back. And so that's not standing your ground. But continue, Anna.
So she had to face some prison time as a result of that, and that case actually led to a mandatory 20-year prison sentence. And people were understandably outraged by this, especially since she had no prior criminal record. Now, the incredible part of the story, the update that I really want to bring to your attention, is that she will get a new trial. However, they have said that they don't like the idea of her using stand your ground as a defense. So for some reason, people like to say that stand your ground was okay in cases like the George Zimmerman trial, but it's not okay when it comes to Marissa Alexander, a woman who has no criminal record, who didn't even kill anyone.
Right.
Yeah, that's right, Anna. If you attempt to kill someone and you fail, there shouldn't be any consequences, should there? No, of course not. That's stupid. Anyway, let's have a quick look at another clip from the Young Turks talking about the same story.
We have an update on the story that we did on Marissa Alexander from Florida. Now, Marissa Alexander is a woman who had an abusive husband.
Now, it is true he'd been arrested and gone to court once before for domestic violence, as had Marissa Alexander. You're forgetting that part, aren't you, Anna? You're forgetting that she physically assaulted Gray and was arrested for it and pleaded no contest to domestic battery. I guess that would go against your narrative, though, wouldn't it, Anna?
And apparently, when they were going through a violent period, she ran into the garage. She wanted to scare him away, so she grabbed the gun and she literally shot the ceiling to scare him away.
Yes, that's right, Anna. She literally shot the ceiling and the bullet stopped halfway up to the ceiling. It turned 90 degrees and headed directly at Gray's head. I don't know how. Maybe he had a really big magnet in his pocket. I don't know. Maybe there was a gunman in the grassy knoll and there was a second shooter. Maybe it was a magic bullet. I don't know, Anna, but it's strange how the shot she fired literally at the ceiling ended up going through the wall and into the living room at head height. It's a mystery. I don't know if we'll ever solve it because, you know, this woman couldn't possibly have tried to kill her husband. No, that would never happen. That is clearly a misogynistic narrative, isn't it?
Well, it worked, except now she's been prosecuted, and as a result of Florida's laws, she will be serving 20 years in prison for it.
So, if you shoot a guy dead in Florida, well, you stood your ground. If you are merciful and make the mistake of just shooting the ceiling, 20.
The handgun, she, you know what I'm saying, she said she's sick of this shit, and she proceeded to go out the garage door. Well, her truck is in the garage. She got the gun out the glove box. I know that's where she keep it. Came back in the house, gun in hand, in front of me and my kids, and shot.
Inside the house?
And shot inside the house, in front of me and both of my kids, and me and my kids. I told them, come on, run out the front door. And we ran out the front door.
Years.
So let me give you more detail on this story. The prosecutor, which is Angela Corey, the same person who's prosecuting George Zimmerman, said that the reason why she has been found guilty by the jury, which deliberated for about 12 minutes, by the way.
Yes, because there was overwhelming evidence that she tried to kill him. Do you not get that? No, of course you don't. Of course you don't get it because it doesn't fit your narrative, right? You can only see females as victims and males as perpetrators. So if the jury look at the evidence and say, wow, this woman tried to kill her husband, well, they must be wrong, right? Because it doesn't fit the fucking narrative.
At least they took their time.
Yeah. Is because a few months after the incident, she went back to her husband's home and said that she wanted an end to their marriage, right?
Okay, so what Anna's talking about is when she was out on bail and she was still waiting trial for the, aggravated assault, which personally I think should be attempted murder, but anyway, she did go to her husband's place to drop off their child. And Gray stated that an argument ensued when he would not allow her to stay overnight. So, this is meant to be a woman afraid for her life, right? She had to go and get the gun because this is a violent, dangerous man. And, just a few months later when she's out on bail waiting to have her court case, she's gone to his house and wanted to stay the night. And when he said no, she physically assaulted him. He had a swollen and bloody left eye, as noted by the police. Now, when the police caught up with Alexander, she denied that she had ever been there, and then she changed her story and said that he had attacked her first, despite the fact that she had absolutely no marks on her. And she pleaded no contest to the domestic battery charge. So what we're dealing with here is a violent woman. Not someone in fear for their life, not a victim who's afraid, but a violent perpetrator who's out on bail at this point for another charge, right? So let's see how Jenk describes this.
Which makes a lot of sense. Well, the prosecutor argued that since she went back to her home, it shows that she was never really in imminent danger. She wasn't really fearing for her life, and as a result, she had no right to grab that gun and shoot the ceiling.
Yes.
So as a result, she is not protected under the state's stand your ground law.
All right, the 4-month argument is asinine, and it drives me crazy that it worked, at least in convincing the jury. So once a kid pulled a knife on me, in fact, twice in high school, I got a knife pulled on me. 4 months later, I saw the same kid in high school. We went to high school together. So what was I supposed to do? Run away every single time? Be like, oh my God, no.
Wow, what an amazing argument put forward by Jenk there. I mean, what an intellectual giant he is. That was an amazing example of why she wouldn't be afraid of this evil domestic abuser. It conveniently ignores all the facts, but apart from that, it was a great argument. So anyway, I think I've proven my case about that particular incident. The way the Young Turks reported it was extremely biased. Of course, she had to be innocent because she's female, and especially because she's black, and therefore she is doubly the victim, and of course the male is automatically guilty, right? Don't worry about the evidence. Don't worry about what was said in court. That's all irrelevant, because we already know the conclusion, right? And this is the result of things like the Gillette ad, right? This is the attitude that it reinforces. And on some level, maybe on a subconscious level, the Young Turks actually know this. Let's have a look at another recent case that the Young Turks covered.
And punishments that need to happen, and not all situations are...
What's the end game you want?
Yeah.
The line that's always in it is they feared for their lives. Once feared for their lives happens, you can do whatever the hell you want to do. Feared for their lives is, quote, you're good. Go for it. We got your back.
Now, he was talking about a case where there was a young black man who was asleep in his car with a gun on his lap, and the police woke him, and after they woke him, he reached for the gun and they shot him. And he was saying there that The excuse that the police always use is that they were in fear for their lives. Well, that seemed to be a good enough argument for Marissa Alexander, right? Even though she could leave the house at any point or get in her car and drive away, the fact that she was afraid for her life seemed to be a good enough excuse for her to shoot at her ex-husband and try to kill him. But apparently police aren't allowed to shoot someone with a gun for some reason. Now we get a comparison made by one of the other panel members, which is truly amazing.
But the truth is, we know that in like an old white lady with a shotgun across her lap, sleep in a Taco Bell parking lot was not going to cause that type of fear. We know that. That's just logic. Like
There's no way they were going to shoot an old white lady.
Well, that is a very, very interesting example that she gave there. The one which Jenk naturally agreed with. Instead of saying a young white male, which would be the logical thing to say considering the point she's trying to make is that of race. Instead of saying that, she says an elderly white woman. Now, let me be clear here. If your grandma gets a shotgun and points it at the cops, then they have every single right in the world to blow grandma away. I'm sorry if your grandma's stupid and does something like that, but the cops have the right to save their lives and protect themselves. Too bad for grandma, basically. Hashtag too bad for grandma. But I do find it interesting that she decided to gender swap when the whole point of her argument is meant to be one of race. Now, are cops less likely to shoot a woman? I would say maybe, especially an elderly woman, because they're less likely to see her as a threat. Now, there is an argument, of course, to be made that grandma is less of a threat than a young black male, or a young white male for that matter. But the argument the Young Turks are making is that police should be blind to that. They should treat everyone completely the same, regardless of statistics, which kind of goes against Francis Maxwell's argument that we should be focused on male violence towards women, doesn't it? Those two arguments seem to be completely in contradiction to one another. In other words, what they're saying is that we should totally ignore the fact that young males are more likely to be a threat, especially if they're black, going by statistics, because we don't want to be racist, right? We don't want to stereotype black males. But at the same time, we should stereotype all males. That's perfectly fine. And you don't think stereotyping all males adds to the negative stereotypes of black males? Do you think cops are just as likely to blow away a black female with a gun? Now, once again, anyone who points a gun at the cops have the right to defend themselves and shoot that person. But I think the cops are less likely to see a black female as a threat. Anyway, back to Francis Maxwell.
In the US, are 16 times more likely to be killed with a firearm than women in any other high-income countries.
Yeah, and what are the statistics for males in the US? Is it 16 times? Is it 2 times? Is it 50 times? We don't know because we only get one statistic. And the assumption is that this is something which uniquely affects women and not males. Now, I would argue that the rate of males being killed by guns in the US is a lot higher than other developed nations, and the reasoning for this is pretty simple. It's because America has a lot more guns than other developed nations. So it stands to reason that both men and women are going to have a higher rate of being killed by guns than in other developed nations. But if you're going to make the argument that this is something which affects women more, or uniquely affects women than men, then you need to put up the male comparison statistics, which of course Francis doesn't do. Now, whenever someone puts up a statistic which only shows how it affects one group, and then makes the argument that this is the only affected group, or the group affected more, you should always be suspicious, because they're not comparing the two groups. And Francis goes on to do that again right now.
Nearly 1 million women have been shot or shot at by an intimate partner, and approximately 4.5 million American women have been threatened with a gun by an intimate partner.
And once again, what are the male comparisons to this? How many males have been threatened with a gun by a female partner in the US, Francis? Is it under 1 million? Is it more than 1 million? Is it equally 1 million? We don't know. I would think that's rather important if you're making the case that women are far more in danger than men, and men are the problem. But you don't supply all the information, do you, Francis? Now Francis goes on to use more statistics, which he's going to use to make a false insinuation.
And behold, unsurprisingly, domestic violence is often at the root of mass tragedies. In at least 54% of the mass shootings between 2009 and 2017, the perpetrator also shot a current or former intimate partner or family member.
Now, in the context of this video, Francis is insinuating that this is male partners shooting and killing female partners, but that's not what this statistic says. It says the perpetrator also shot a current or former intimate partner or family member. So yes, that does include males shooting female partners. It also includes female partners shooting male partners. It also includes children shooting parents. It also includes children shooting other siblings. And it also includes parents, both mothers and fathers, shooting children. But that's not the narrative that Francis is interested in. He's not interested in breaking down these statistics and looking at the different groups. Oh, no, that would be too much trouble. It's much easier just to insinuate that it's all males doing this to all females. Right, Francis? It's toxic masculinity. We all know that when a mother shoots her children, that's the perfect example of toxic masculinity, isn't it? Somehow, yeah.
Which is why it's so important not only to look at legislators to ensure the country is doing everything in its power to regulate weapons and make it harder for those who seek to cause harm to obtain a weapon, but on a social level, we must actively be working to highlight this problem. That means men asking other men to be better. I really don't understand how this became a stigma, especially when the same people complaining about how you're just vilifying all men or all white men are often the first ones to say the Muslim community need to do more to address their community whenever a terrorist who happens to be Muslim commits an atrocity.
Yes, and when those people do that, Francis, you call them bigots. You say they're Islamophobic. You say you can't generalize about all Muslims, so you're being a massive hypocrite here. But, you know, I'm not surprised at that in the least.
Say, what about black-on-black crime whenever an instance involving a black person and police arises? But the thing is, this is an issue that resides predominantly with men, and that includes me. As far as I check, I'm a dude, and I understand that that means I have a role to play in helping to address it, which is basically part of what the Gillette advert was trying to do. Because if you bypassed all of the above mass shootings, or they just rolled into one and became white noise, then more commercials are needed, more exposure is needed, more effort is needed to make the issue unavoidable, regardless of how uncomfortable it makes you.
Now, I think you'll all agree that the Young Turks have really shown us how you have to act to be a progressive, right? It's a little bit complex, so I'll break it down for you. What you do is you cherry-pick statistics and examples to show that men are the perpetrators and women are their victims, and then you stereotype all males, unless, of course, the particular male is black, in which case doing so would be racist, unless, of course, that particular male is accused of having a female victim, in which case that male is automatically guilty even before he goes to trial. We just ignore the fact that he's black and focus on the fact that he's male. Even if the female who's the alleged victim is actually the victimizer and the male is the victim, in that case, we just ignore all the evidence and just assume that the male is guilty and the female is clearly the victim. You don't let the facts get in the way of the narrative. Now, I don't know about you, but all that seems a little bit complex. I much prefer a simple way of looking at the world. What we do is we look at a case-by-case basis, and regardless of the gender or the race of the particular person, of the accused or of the alleged victim, and we just look at the evidence. We don't start with assumptions, we look at the evidence and we come to conclusions based on that evidence, and we should be open to changing our minds about that evidence if new evidence comes up. I don't know, that seems like a better method to me, but what do I know? I mean, I don't have a gender study degree, right? I'm not a progressive, thankfully. Now, just to finish off, I should point out that when I was editing this video, I realized that I missed something earlier on. Let's have a little look at a clip from the start of this video.
Louisiana man shot and killed his girlfriend, his parents, and 2 others with a handgun he stole from his father.
So he killed his girlfriend, his parents, and 2 others. Do you care to guess what gender the 2 others were? If you guessed male, you would be 100% correct. So the death toll in that particular case was 3 males and 2 females. And this, according to Francis, is an example of how males are more violent towards women. Well done, Francis. Well done. You fucking intellectual giant.
Are men the problem? Whether it's sexual violence, domestic violence, or sexual harassment, we often hear that men are the problem. We all want to live in a world free from violence and abuse. But could we improve the way we talk about these issues? Imagine these 100 people represent the population of Australia. Each year, 1 in 100 will experience sexual violence, 2 in 100 will experience domestic violence, and 13 in 100 will experience sexual harassment. Most men and women abhor these crimes. But what about the perpetrators? Are they men? According to government research, more than a quarter of Australians experiencing sexual violence say the perpetrator was female, along with over a third of people experiencing domestic violence and 40% of people experiencing sexual harassment. That's 60,000 victims of sexual violence, 100,000 victims of domestic violence, and 1 million victims of sexual harassment abused by women every year. While most perpetrators are men, many are women. When we say men are the problem, we end up blaming all men for the actions of a few. We also make women who perpetrate violence and their victims invisible by blaming men for their crimes. Would we do a better job of preventing sexual violence, domestic violence, and sexual harassment if men and women stopped saying men are the problem and started working together to stop men and women from committing these crimes?